The story kicks off with a girl named Ashley going off on this chubby guy, accusing him of kicking her out of her own shop just to open an exact copy in the same spot. Heartbroken and furious, she keeps going, claiming he didn't just steal the location. He swiped their entire menu too, proving he was plotting to steal their secret recipe from day one. The guy just brushes her off like it's nothing, claiming he's just mixing basic ingredients anyone can buy and selling them for a profit. Then he switches from ignoring her to straight up mocking her, sarcastically asking if she invented honey, lemon, and cakes herself. He tells her to stop making a scene over something anyone could come up with and orders her to quit disrupting his business and get lost. Ashley and her friend are left in total shock and despair. Her friend worriedly asks what they're gonna do now, while Ashley realizes just how messed up their situation is. She bitterly remembers how her mom and sister spent 10 whole years perfecting that honey lemon cake recipe, barely getting any sleep just to get it right. And now, after all that grind, not only was the recipe stolen so easily, but they're about to end up homeless on the streets. Desperate, Ashley tries to get the attention of people passing by, shouting at them not to be fooled because this shop is just a fake ripoff that stole their original recipe. But her efforts are useless. People are too hyped to try the famous cake shop and start lining up without even glancing at her. Ashley feels totally crushed seeing the crowds ignore her warnings, and with tears in her eyes, she wonders if anyone will ever help them. Suddenly, a loud blast echoes, terrifying the chubby guy and making him wonder if a war just broke out, while Ashley stands there stunned by the sudden turn of events. Right then, a bunch of elegant servants in formal wear appear, clearing the way for a stunning, luxurious building. This building was actually the original Honey Lemon Cake Bakery, and its fancy doors swung open to welcome everyone. The guy who stole the recipe loses it. He rushes to the entrance of the new bakery, getting in a staff member's face and accusing them of having zero business ethics for opening an identical shop right next to his, demanding to see the owner immediately. At that moment, a breathtakingly beautiful and royal-looking blonde lady steps forward, announcing she's the owner and coldly asking why she was summoned. She calmly and confidently follows up, asking if he has some kind of business with her. Ashley and her friend are floored when they see her. Her friend recognizes her instantly. It's Lady Aristina, the noble girl from the ducal family Ashley works for. Lady Aristina was famous throughout the empire, but for all the wrong reasons. She had a terrible reputation, was constantly hated, a regular in the gossip columns, and known for ruining every party she attended. Her full name is Lady Aristina Bianca Rosine, daughter of a prestigious ducal family, nicknamed the Villainous who will ruin the empire because of her reckless behavior. But despite her rep, she was the only daughter of a filthy rich duke and had more money than she knew how to spend. And lately, people had started calling her by a brand new nickname. The guy confronts Aristina, accusing her of using her noble status to steal his business. Aristina just hits him with a smirk, throwing his own words back at him, the same ones he told Ashley, asking what he's even talking about since she's just using ingredients sold in the market. She continues her savage mockery, asking him if he was the one who invented honey, lemon, and cakes. She calls his complaining a fake scene and tells him to back off and stop interfering with her business, leaving him completely speechless and dazed. Ashley couldn't help but let out a little giggle watching this, but she quickly realized what she did and got scared, rushing to apologize to her lady. Panic set in when she saw the look of anger on Aristina's face. She realized she'd lost her mind laughing in her presence. Ashley bowed quickly, begging for her lady's forgiveness. In a sharp, scary tone, Aristina tells her she's committed a very serious offense and asks if she even realizes the scale of her mistake while she's begging. But suddenly, Aristina's face switches to a bright, excited smile. She leans into Ashley and says her real mistake was not telling her about this genius business idea sooner. She enthusiastically declares that Ashley's mom is a total genius, leaving Ashley completely confused. Ashley admits she has no idea what her lady means, so Aristina cunningly replies that if she doesn't understand, she'll have to punish her for neglecting her duties as a maid. Lady Aristina gives a strict order to the butler to make Ashley write a formal pledge immediately. The butler obeys while Ashley stands there in shock, wondering what kind of pledge this is. Terror takes over Ashley. She has a feeling someone with Aristina's personality might force her into a lifetime slavery contract. To make matters worse, her family hasn't paid off the shop loan yet, so she despairingly concludes her family is doomed. But what was presented to her wasn't a slavery contract. It was a business contract for their products. She stares at the document in total confusion. Aristina simply explains that all her family has to do is make the cakes, and she'll handle buying them at a high price and take care of all the sales herself. Even though the contract was clearly in their favor, Ashley hesitated, feeling like her lady would be the one taking a loss on the deal. When she voiced her concern, Aristina sharply asked if she had a problem with that. As Aristina held her pen sternly, it seemed like she and her butler were exchanging a knowing look. The butler whispered in Ashley's ear, explaining that his lady was bored of spending her money on luxury goods and jewelry and was just looking for a new way to blow through her fortune. He low-key scolded her for not realizing this despite serving her. Then he urged her to go along with her lady's wish, before announcing loudly to the crowd that to celebrate the signing of this contract, a royal opera performance would be held. The butler continued his wild announcement, adding that anyone who buys the Ashley family original honey lemon cake set that day would get a lottery ticket. He revealed the grand prize was worth $50 million, leaving Ashley and her mom standing there in total disbelief. The crowd went wild, amazed by the sheer generosity of this unprecedented promotion, and they rushed to buy every single cake available. Ashley's mom asked her daughter what was even happening, but Ashley didn't have a clear answer herself. Ashley was thinking about the insane costs. It must have been tens of billions, from buying the building and setting it up to organizing this massive event, all at Lady Aristina's expense. At that moment, Ashley realized why people were calling her lady the millionaire fixer. She'd heard before that her lady's luxury spending hobby had taken some weird turns, but she never imagined she'd personally benefit from it. She and her mom just stared in awe. Her view of her lady started to change. After thinking she was just cruel and violent, she wondered if her personality was more complex than just being scary. Ashley gathered her courage and hesitantly asked if all of this was an attempt to help her family. Aristina's expression instantly turned sharp, and she threateningly asked Ashley if she was accusing her of doing a good deed. Terrified by the reaction, Ashley rushed to apologize, bowing repeatedly and begging for forgiveness for her unintentional personal attack. Aristina hid her face behind her fan and told Ashley there was no point in questioning it now, since they were tied together by an unbreakable financial contract. Then, in a low voice, she asked if she was still thinking about killing her. In the middle of all this, Aristina revealed her true motive. She was doing all this for one reason: to avoid her inevitable fate of being murdered. It turned out she was keeping a list of potential suspects who might kill her in the future. And that day, she'd successfully crossed one off the list after confirming his motives weren't enough. Aristina felt satisfied, feeling she'd taken a new step toward survival. While enjoying her bath, she asked her maid to bring her the catalog. The maid brought it, and Aristina took it while soaking in the chill vibes. Aristina flipped through the catalog quickly and pointed out a huge section. Then she ordered her maid to buy every single piece in that section, in every available color, and the maid obeyed immediately. Aristina thought to herself that all these purchases were necessary for her survival, but admitted that shopping was the best way to relieve stress. While she was enjoying herself, flashes of her past life crossed her mind. The price of the wine she was drinking now was equal to her entire monthly income back then, and the cost of some decorations in her bathroom was the same as a small car. Even the price of her bathrobe was worth the security deposit of her old tiny apartment. She realized that her ability to automatically calculate the value of all these expensive things proved one thing: in her past life, she was just an ordinary commoner. Aristina looks back at her past life, where she lived a hand-to-mouth existence, and her only joy was reading mystery novels. Nothing made her happier than unmasking a killer. She started reading a novel she originally thought was a high-society mystery, but discovered it was actually a fantasy romance she couldn't even remember the title of. In this novel, there was a villainess named Aristina Bianca Rosine. According to the story, Aristina had been in love with the Crown Prince since they were kids, but he didn't feel the same way. Instead, the Crown Prince chose the story's heroine, Serene Hyperion, who was super beautiful, smart, and graceful. Her burning jealousy drove her to bully Serene and ruin her reputation, until one day Serene suddenly invited her to a tea party to ask for forgiveness. At that party, Aristina apologized to Serene for everything and offered to share a reconciliation drink to bury the hatchet. Since a reconciliation toast was a sacred ritual involving a vow before the gods, Serene happily accepted. Following tradition, Aristina, the one seeking forgiveness, drank first. Then Serene followed. While the ritual seemed to be going as usual, Serene suddenly collapsed, showing signs of poisoning and crying out for help. Serene narrowly survived thanks to her private doctor who had been secretly following her, but all fingers naturally pointed directly at Aristina. The guests were furious, believing that anyone who mocks sacred rituals by poisoning a reconciliation cup deserves nothing but death. Even though Aristina wasn't actually the culprit, no one believed a single word of her denials. Her father confronted her in a rage, calling her an absolute disgrace. He screamed that she wasn't just a constant disappointment, but that she'd now dragged their family name through the mud. And just like that, her father abandoned her too, ordering her to be locked in the annex until the imperial court issued its sentence. Aristina realized she'd been framed in a setup. She tried everything to gather evidence to reveal the truth and prove her innocence, but one night while she was searching, she was startled by a mysterious shadow approaching her. She let out a loud scream that the servants outside heard. Before she could prove her innocence, she met her end in a mysterious death. Back to her past life, the girl, being a mystery novel fan, was totally obsessed with trying to figure out who killed Aristina, but she quickly remembered with annoyance that what she was reading wasn't a mystery, but a fantasy romance, calling it a waste of time. While walking down the street, lost in thought about how she was busy with part-time jobs while novel characters were obsessed with dating, she wished a luxury car would just appear in her life, and simple as that, her wish came true. A Mercedes driven by a drunk driver appeared, and she thought that was the end for her. She opened her eyes to hear strange voices talking about divine punishment and how they should bury or burn her, wondering if she was still alive but refusing to believe this was her fate. She found herself in a strange place that wasn't a hospital or a street corner. She and the maid screamed in panic as the servants realized Lady Aristina was awake and hadn't died. She listened in confusion as the maids called her Aristina. When she checked out the place, it looked weirdly familiar. It was a perfect match for the illustrations of the annex in the novel. She looked at the calendar to find the date was July 13th, the exact same day Aristina was killed while held in the annex. Most importantly, the face in the mirror was a perfect match for the image of Aristina she'd imagined. She realized it was too clear to be a dream, and came to the terrifying conclusion that she'd reincarnated as the Villainous who was about to be killed. In her shock, the maids rushed to apologize, explaining they thought her heart had stopped and she'd passed away, begging her to forgive their slip of the tongue. She felt annoyed, wondering why, out of all the novels, she had to reincarnate into a fantasy romance she hadn't even finished reading. Questions started spinning in her head about why Aristina came back to life in the first place, and if her reincarnating into this body changed the original plot. Then it hit her. She was terrified by the thought that if the person who killed Aristina found out she was still alive, they'd definitely come back to finish the job. She tried to pull herself together and organize her thoughts, deciding she first had to understand the situation she was in. The facts were clear. First, she's in Aristina's body. Second, there's an unknown killer targeting her. Third, this body had so many enemies she couldn't even make a list. It was like a long line of people wanting her gone. And finally, the execution option was still very much on the table, making her feel like death was inevitable no matter what. She thought about the bitter irony. She'd just woken up from death only to find herself headed back to the afterlife. But she flatly refused that fate, slamming her fist down and declaring she wouldn't give up. Her only ray of hope in this mess was that she remembered even the minor characters because she'd originally read the book thinking it was a mystery. She wondered if she could use that knowledge to narrow down the suspects. She realized that if she could survive, this life could be pretty sweet. She had incredible beauty and was the only daughter of the richest man in the empire. At that point, she made a firm decision. She would survive by any means necessary and become the ultimate survivor in this place. Her first priority was getting out of the annex before the killer returned, so she announced she was leaving, confusing her maid who asked where she was going. The maid tried to stop her, reminding her she was under house arrest, but at that moment, a handsome man suddenly appeared. She was dazzled by his good looks, wondering who this stunning person was, while the maid bowed respectfully, calling him Your Excellency. She immediately realized that if he was a duke, he could only be Aristina's father, and he looked way younger than she'd imagined. This was Duke Carnel Rosine, head of the prestigious Rosine family, the absolute ruler of the house who had overcome hardships with dignity despite his fragile health. His life was like that of a famous fantasy novel protagonist, barely surviving as the sickly heir of an ancient family, until the story changed because of his daughter Aristina, making him the lead of a I Became the Villainess's Father story. The Duke was always busy cleaning up the messes Aristina caused: verbal abuse, blackmail, threats, but even he couldn't do anything about the latest incident, the attempted poisoning of the future crown princess. According to the original story, he was supposed to find his daughter's corpse at this time. Instead, he found her alive, and angrily concluded she'd lured him here with a lie about her death instead of showing any remorse. He sharply asked if she needed to stand on the guillotine to come to her senses. She realized things had gotten complicated because of her reincarnation, and that she had to get out of this at any cost. So she decided to use that weapon. Suddenly, she cried out in pain, clutching her heart, using the faking sick skills she'd perfected for nearly 20 years. She fell to her knees, claiming the pain was unbearable and she couldn't breathe, worrying the maids who rushed to her side. The Duke looked confused and hesitant. He definitely didn't expect this reaction. Finally, he gave in and ordered the butler to call a doctor, while she secretly celebrated her plan's success. Aristina used the opportunity her father's presence provided to look for that thing mentioned in the original novel, and she actually found it. The evidence the original Aristina managed to get only when it was too late. The evidence was a suspicious ring stained with an unidentified blood spot. Aristina had found it shortly after being locked in the annex library while venting her extreme anger and frustration. She was screaming in despair, wondering why no one believed her even though she didn't do it. Meanwhile, she heard two garden workers talking. One was insisting to the other that Lady Aristina was the one who tried to poison Lady Hyperion. Even though the other worker also thought she was the culprit, he added a key detail. He said that on the day of the incident, right before it happened, he was looking for the new gardener and couldn't find him. When he went searching, he saw Lady Hyperion talking to someone in the greenhouse. He couldn't hear the whole conversation, but he clearly heard her say, "This is a secret between just the two of us." After they left, he went there out of curiosity and found this ring. The original Aristina heard this, screamed at the workers from the window, and ordered them to bring the ring immediately. And so, by terrifying the scared gardeners, she got a birthstone ring engraved with Serene's initials. She planned to use it to prove her innocence, but was killed before she could. Now, holding the ring, the new Aristina felt confident she'd definitely be able to clear her name. She turned to her father and asked how Serene was doing, which surprised him. He told her she'd recovered significantly thanks to the best medical team working day and night. And she replied that it was a relief, and her father agreed. But then he added that they'd now be able to fully interrogate her. And Aristina stopped, wondering what he just said. She was furious thinking about how everyone condemned her without a proper investigation, even though evidence like this could be found with just a little searching. She confronted her father with the ring. He asked what it was, and she told him it belonged to Lady Serene, and that she'd dropped it in the greenhouse. Asking if he didn't find that weird, she went on, questioning why the lady visited their home without them knowing. On the same day, she supposedly offered her a reconciliation drink, and how she left behind a blood-stained ring. She confidently declared that if this ring was investigated, it would prove her innocence and urged him to move quickly, even though she knew from her mystery novels how things usually go. But her father's reaction wasn't what she expected. He looked at her coldly, which confused her. Instead of caring about the evidence, he completely ignored it and said he was going back to the meeting, leaving her stunned. How could he ignore such a crucial piece of info his daughter just discovered? He screamed at her to shut up, saying he thought she'd at least pretend to be remorseful after being quiet for a bit. But instead, she was trying to pin the blame on Lady Hyperion again. She tried to defend herself, saying she wasn't trying to accuse anyone, but she realized her mistake right then. She suddenly remembered the original Aristina was a repeat offender who always blamed Serene for her own mistakes. Her father was so used to hearing her accuse Serene of things she didn't do that. It wasn't surprising he didn't believe her now. Even when she was telling the truth, he thought it was just another desperate attempt to escape punishment. He ordered the guards to take her back into custody. As she was being led away, she wondered in despair how this could be happening. She realized they wouldn't listen to anything she said, and at this rate, she'd be executed before she could even find the real killer. She sat in her room, sighing in despair and asking herself if there was any way out. Aristina's reputation was worse than she'd imagined, and it was unlikely the ducal family would help her. She thought that if she had money, she could hire someone to help uncover the truth. Aristina reflects on her situation, realizing she has nothing left but champagne and new dresses. She thinks sadly about poor original Aristina, who stubbornly held on until the end with only these simple things. Unaware she could die at any moment, she remembers how Aristina screamed in anger that she hadn't worn her new dress yet, while her father ordered her locked up with her clothes and finest champagne. She thought about their shared fate, both dying a miserable death. Aristina drinks from her glass, thinking she can't comfort the original Aristina, but offers her this drink anyway. Despite everything, this lady's life was better than her previous one, full of hardship. With tears in her eyes, she wonders if there's anyone she can use or benefit from to get out of her jam. She turns to the mannequins in the room and mocks them, wondering how there's nothing of value here despite the reckless life the owner of this body lived. Then she starts shaking the mannequins violently, demanding an answer, asking if there's anything she can use. The servants whisper that she's gone crazy as her death approaches and that she got drunk off one sip. Suddenly, one of the jewelry boxes opens on its own, terrifying the servants who swear they didn't touch a thing. They wonder how the box opened since it's sealed with magic only the young lady can break. And Aristina wonders if original Aristina's spirit is helping her. If so, there might be evidence inside. She pretends she doesn't remember the password, so the maid tells her it's her birthday, October 31st. Aristina is amazed by this weird coincidence, since that's her own birthday too. She enters 1031 into the box's lock. When the box opens, she finds a dazzling necklace made of 49 diamonds and pearls called the Star of Aurora. She realizes such a precious piece could be a great deal, and so, by chance, her money problem was solved. Now, if she can clear her name, she can avoid being killed again by the culprit or the guillotine. But the problem is no one listens to her. She starts thinking of someone who might care about this case. Someone who doesn't care about her rep or the royal family. Someone who only values the truth. Suddenly, she remembers someone. The next holy trial is coming up soon. She remembers that person's grudge with Aristina started 2 years ago. In another scene, the Empress sits on her throne addressing the princes standing before her. She tells them she received a sudden revelation during her prayers the previous night. The revelation said the late Emperor's coffin must be lavishly decorated with amaranthia flowers. Only then would peace come to the empire. The Empress's words sent the Crown Prince and the Second Prince searching everywhere for amaranthia flowers. The news spread among the nobles, distorted by rumors. But the truth was different. It wasn't about flowers, but choosing the Crown Princess. Aristina, who secretly loved the Crown Prince, managed to get amaranthia seeds, but the seeds didn't grow. The gardener told her it was impossible for amaranthia to grow in ordinary soil. It only grows in the holy sanctuary. Aristina simply suggested they take them from the sanctuary, but the gardener flatly refused. She explained the flower was endangered and picking it would be catastrophic. But Aristina mocked her, saying she'd seen someone pick flowers there before. The gardener replied that was a botanist. Aristina insisted she'd pick the flower and give it to the Crown Prince. While she was trying, someone appeared and asked what she was doing. It was Rolien Lacroix, the representative of God. He coldly told her she'd lost her mind for daring to take God's property from the sanctuary. Rolien Lacroix appears as the head of the Holy Order and the only Knight of the Holy Spirit in the Empire. A title that might sound merciful on the surface, but in reality, he roamed, surrounded by a group of armored holy knights, ruling without mercy over anyone who dared trespass on his territory. In spirit and appearance, he looked more like a feared underworld boss than a clergyman. Back in the Duke's office, Aristina's father slams his fist on the desk in a rage, venting his frustration that if his daughter wanted to cause trouble, she shouldn't have gotten caught, especially by someone dangerous like Rolien Lacroix. The Duke discusses the crisis with his aides. One explains that the Emperor himself can't control Lacroix, and despite his high status as a duke and his massive wealth, their hands are tied. The Duke rubs his forehead in total frustration, wondering what they can do to get out of this mess, then helplessly concludes they have no choice but to use that thing. That thing was a written religious indulgence the Holy Order had promised the Rosine family as a reward for helping the clergy in the past, hoping handing it over would be enough to make them look the other way. The Duke hands the document to Rolien, who is surprised the family would give up such a precious heirloom for this case, while the Duke justifies that they had no other choice to save the situation. Rolien addresses Aristina, who is standing there with her hands tied, coldly telling her she should consider herself lucky to have a father who sacrifices for her like this. Then he leans in with a sharp, threatening look, stating he prays for her that she never does this again, because if it happens, there'll be no room for compromise. She'll face a holy trial. A holy trial is a strict procedure held under the absolute authority of the Holy Order, and its maximum penalty is death by burning at the stake. Aristina thinks about how power and influence mean absolutely nothing in that trial, which is why original Aristina desperately tried to avoid it, but she realizes now that this strict, unbiased justice might be exactly what she needs. She concludes that knowing Rolien's personality, he'll investigate with extreme precision to uncover the absolute truth. So, if she can intentionally trigger a trial, she'll finally be able to clear her name and avoid execution. She makes up her mind and clenches her fist, deciding it's time to pick another flower to manufacture a crisis, thinking it's best to prepare a backup plan just in case things go south. Aristina realizes she first has to find a way to sneak out of the locked house. She stands puzzled in front of her displayed dresses, wondering how to make it happen. Suddenly, an idea hits her. She orders her maids to bring paper and a pen immediately, and one obeys quickly. Aristina starts writing with total focus. Once finished, she's grateful her body still has the muscle memory for high-level calligraphy and etiquette. Next, she moves to step 2. She takes the precious Star of Aurora necklace and coldly cuts the string, letting the pearls and diamonds scatter. She calls 2 maids over who are standing nearby. They approach hesitantly and surprised. Aristina holds a pearl and tells them she has a mission for them, and she'll give a precious pearl to whoever volunteers. The maids are stunned and wonder if she's serious, but one whispers to the other that this is an impossible trap, reminding her how the lady slapped another maid just for dusting her jewelry. The other realizes she's right, and they panic. The maids nervously turn down the offer, pretending to be humble and claiming they have no desire for her precious jewelry and that it wouldn't suit their status anyway. Aristina loses her patience and slams her fist on the desk, terrifying the maids who tremble and beg for mercy, thinking they angered her. But Aristina expected this reaction and pulls out the paper she prepared, explaining it's a formal certificate proving she's giving them these pearls as a legal gift so they won't be held accountable. She assures them it's stamped with the official Rosine family seal to totally put them at ease. The maids swallow hard and nervously ask what kind of mission she wants for this fortune. Aristina smirks and points to the displayed dresses, telling them it's very simple. All she wants is for them to move these items to a specific location without attracting attention. The scene shifts to Duke Rosine's office, where he gets a report that Aristina returned her new dresses. One of his aides is super skeptical, guessing she might have threatened another servant to give a fake report. The servant firmly denies it, saying he saw it with his own eyes. The maids were actually loading all her new dresses into a carriage. The aides watch the carriage leave from the window in total shock, noting this is unprecedented since she never lets go of anything once she gets her hands on it. They wonder if she's actually starting to rethink her behavior and feel remorse. But the Duke totally mocks the idea, considering it just a setup for some new cunning trick. He berates his aides for not realizing his daughter's talents yet, warning them not to even look at her or give her any attention to avoid falling into her traps. Aristina's escape plan worked. The carriage carrying the returned mannequins moved out with Aristina hiding inside. Her plan was to hide among the mannequins to slip away, smiling as she realized her bad reputation finally worked in her favor. After changing into maid's clothes, she asked one of the maids to take her to the agreed spot, while the maid was super worried about leaving her lady alone. Aristina's mind was on the dangerous thieves roaming the streets at night, specifically remembering the Phantom Thief, mentioned in the original novel, a mysterious figure who only steals the most precious treasures, which made her stay alert. But she was somewhat relieved remembering the Phantom Thief always sends a warning card before striking, so she planned to sell what she had before that happened. Then she asked the maid if she brought what she asked for. The maid handed over a cloth bundle, confirming she brought the item, which was actually a family heirloom only the Rosine family could access, known as the Angel's Rags. This heirloom was an old, torn cloak infused with holy power. It didn't just hide the wearer's identity, it also repelled most physical attacks. Aristina remembered how her father, the Duke, wore this cloak whenever he had to settle the mess she caused, feeling sorry for his conflict-filled life before putting on the cloak herself to go undercover. When the carriage arrived, she told the maid, and Aristina asked her to wait a moment. The maid watched the place carefully, noticing people coming and going looked exhausted, which made her suspicious. But she decided not to overthink it. A few minutes later, Aristina came back and decided to move forward. The maid asked in a low, hesitant voice if she really traded the Star of Aurora for that scrap of paper, but the other servant hushed her, warning her not to let anyone hear. Aristina thought to herself that calling the document a scrap of paper was rude. This paper was the lifeline that would save her in the upcoming trial. The maid worriedly asked if she was sure about staying alone and leaving, and Aristina confirmed and ordered her to go. Aristina walked confidently toward the massive building, the Holy Order headquarters. Aristina snuck inside undercover, wondering what made the original Aristina come to such a scary place just to pick a flower. Though she admitted she wasn't in a position to judge, she decided to walk with total confidence as if she belonged there, thinking it would lower suspicions. While walking through the trees, she spotted someone in a cloak in her way. The place was quiet and so dark she could barely see. Suddenly, she heard a metallic clank that caught her attention and scared her. She guessed the sound was a chain hitting the ground and wondered if there was a guard dog nearby, peeking out very carefully. She was shocked to see it wasn't a dog, but a person standing silently in the pitch black. The man's face was hidden under a hood, and she noticed many scars on his bare chest, plus the chains he was wearing, leading her to guess he might be a mercenary. At that moment, the mysterious man noticed her, turned sharply, and asked who she was. He followed up, questioning why she was sneaking around the holy sanctuary alone so late at night. The silver-haired man with a mask, covering half his face, gave her a piercing look, suggesting her appearance made it look like she came to steal something. Aristina was totally taken aback, wondering how he noticed her when she thought she was hiding so well. She realized stuttering would make her look more suspicious, so she vowed to sound totally confident. She bravely stepped forward, denying the theft charge and claiming she was on her way to the church to pray. But the man replied sarcastically, hinting this wasn't the time for evening prayers. Aristina justified it by saying she preferred coming at a quiet time so her voice would reach God better, hinting her current situation wasn't easy. The mysterious man smirked, calling her clever. Then he told her to come back another time because he got there first, justifying that his situation wasn't simple either, and he needed a private meeting with God. Aristina insisted her prayer had to be today, pretending to be a poor maid. He mocked her, saying she should work comfortably inside since he's a mercenary who handles wind and rain, which really annoyed her given the critical timing. Aristina started telling a dramatic fake story to the masked man, claiming her family was on the brink of bankruptcy and they'd end up homeless. The man replied that he'd never even had a place he could call home since birth. He added that his features prevent him from even finding a decent job, so much so that homeless people pity him and give him money. Aristina replied she never received charity like him. Plus, She had a sick father wasting away at home. The man replied with total coldness, pointing out she at least has a father, while his parents were killed when he was young. He asked in a challenging tone if she still thought she was more pitiable than him, leaving her stuttering and choking on her words from the shock. She stared at his masked face, wondering what kind of jerk was standing in front of her. The man told her to go back if she had nothing left to say. She thought despairingly that if she could just say she was about to be murdered, she'd win this pity battle. Aristina realized this man wasn't normal and she had to avoid a direct confrontation, so she agreed to leave and backed off. But she had another plan. She'd pretend to leave then stay, admitting it was a dirty trick. But her life was on the line and she couldn't give up. After a while, she peeked from the bushes, believing the man had left. She stepped out cautiously, thinking she had to be careful not to run into him again. At that moment, a sharp, shiny object on the ground caught her eye. She wondered if the mercenary dropped it, and noticed it looked like a piece from a very expensive statue. She was furious when it hit her that the guy might be the real thief, which explains why he was so desperate to kick her out. Still, she decided to keep the precious piece for now, thinking it might be useful somewhere. Aristina gazed at the forest under the moonlight, remembering the amaranth flower field was in the center. Once she arrived, she was dazzled by the glowing field and the stunning white flowers surrounding the building. She reached out to touch a flower, convinced it was no wonder people wanted to pick them because of their beauty. Suddenly, Aristina jumped when the masked man appeared behind her again. She was shocked he was still there after she thought he left. He coldly told her she didn't disappoint him, as expected. The man grabbed her, announcing that thanks to her, he'd get a reward for reporting a trespasser. She struggled to stop him. She told him firmly that if she was afraid of punishment, she shouldn't have done it in the first place. She interrupted him, explaining that wasn't the point, and asked him to report her after she picked the flower, not before. The man looked at her in confusion. She was thinking that picking the flower would guarantee a harsh punishment, which is exactly what she wanted, to anger the Holy Order to get the maximum penalty. The man asked in disbelief if something was wrong with her for asking that. He concluded there's only one type of person who begs for punishment and decided to call the guards, ignoring her pleas. Aristina screamed, warning him he'd lose 10 million barrels if he rang the bell. The man looked at her, asking what she meant. She confessed her real goal wasn't to get a flower. She explained her aim was to undergo a holy trial under Lord Rollian Lacroix's personal supervision, which totally surprised the man. He asked if she realized how brutal that trial was. She confirmed she did, but added she also knows the Lord only values the truth, meaning he'll always side with the oppressed. She explained she desperately needed to meet him, but a maid couldn't get near someone of his status, so the man immediately guessed she was planning to get arrested on purpose. Aristina confirmed his guess and told him to do the math. Instead of a reporting reward that might not exceed 1 million barrels, she offered him a better deal, claiming she had a story that would intrigue the entire nation, and if she reached the court safely and he was the sole witness, he'd make a massive profit, status, and fame. Aristina started telling him about the massive money he'd make from selling his testimony, pointing out he looks healthy enough to live a long time and advising him to prepare for his future. Suddenly, the man burst into a loud fit of laughter, admitting he hadn't laughed like that in a long time, while Aristina stood there dazed and unbelieving. After he calmed down, he agreed to pretend he saw nothing, expressing curiosity to hear that story she mentioned, which made Aristina's face light up with hope. The man turned to leave, sarcastically wishing her luck while calling her a pitiable maid. Aristina breathed a sigh of relief after he left. She was afraid her plan would fail before it even started. Then she picked the amaranthia flower with confidence. Once she was ready, she grabbed the bell rope and pulled it hard, sending a loud ring through the area. Guards' voices rose, wondering who the intruder was, and birds flew off in a panic, while Aristina stood there with a sly smile, announcing the start of her show. The next day, inside the Holy Order courtroom, the crowd's murmurs were full of condemnation for Aristina, calling her shameless for combining an attempted poisoning with stealing holy items, and wondering why she dared to call Lady Serene as a witness. Meanwhile, Duke Rosine was reading a letter from his daughter saying she found a way for both of them to survive and asking him to attend the holy trial to see for himself, making him wonder in shock why he was even in this situation. Aristina stood in the center of the hall with total confidence, while her father looked at her wondering where this baseless confidence came from. The jury entered, followed by the announcement of Lady Serene Hyperion's arrival, who walked in calmly. The crowd felt for Serene, noting how thin she'd become and praising her kind heart, a sharp contrast to Aristina, who was shunned as a villainess. While Serene was loved by everyone, Serene stood under the lights and vowed before God to vote fairly and justly. Aristina watched, thinking that if Serene was the mastermind, she wouldn't have appeared, wondering if she's truly innocent or relying on something, concluding the truth would come out once Rollian arrived. The doors opened, announcing His Excellency's arrival. Aristina got ready to prove her innocence as planned and started bowing to welcome him. But Rolian coldly cut her off, ordering her to skip the greetings, which shocked her and made her realize things wouldn't go as easily as she'd imagined. Rolian gave her a piercing, terrifying look, reminding her of her name and confirming he'd warned her she'd face death if she repeated her actions. Aristina trembled inside, sweating and keeping a nervous smile, realizing seeing him in person was terrifying. Rolian continued his harsh scolding, sarcastically asking if the young lady lacked a brain to act like this after his explicit warning. Aristina thought about his brutality and the need to pick her words carefully, but she boldly shot back, asking if His Excellency lacked vision, and confirming that if she had used what was in her head, she wouldn't be standing before him now. She immediately realized the gravity of her slip of the tongue, a result of her old habit of talking back, and noticed the dark, angry aura surrounding Rolian, cursing her impulsiveness. Rolian accused her of trying to stall and delay her punishment. Aristina tried to deny it, insisting she had something to say, but he cut her off, calling her words nonsense and ordering the proceedings to continue. Rolian coldly announced he'd reached a conclusion on this blasphemy case, terrifying Aristina. He was reaching a verdict just 3 minutes into the trial. Aristina knew hesitating in moments like this meant certain loss, so she sprang up, refusing to accept the situation. She slid to her knees with force in a desperate move, screaming His Excellency's name at the top of her lungs. Everyone was shocked by her sudden move, and despite the pain in her knees, she felt she'd successfully taken the initiative and confused Rolian, who stared at her in daze. She vowed to herself that if no one was ready to listen, she'd force them all to. Aristina took inspiration from holy texts, deciding to use the power of the gods to her advantage in that critical moment. She raised a cloth bundle high before everyone, boldly declaring she'd received a divine revelation and that this evidence was given to her along with the revelation, demanding the court investigate it immediately. Aristina realized she had to play her best card in this world. The fact that the words of the gods are absolute law, that's the secret behind the Empress's power, and it's exactly why Rolian, as the messenger of the gods, can't just ignore a divine revelation. Rolian mockingly asked how a revelation could possibly come to someone like her, but she answered with calm confidence that the merciful gods had blessed someone who was wronged, and she was ready to explain everything in detail. She started telling her story, explaining how while she was locked up and drowning in despair, the gods appeared to her. She told them the gods showed her a vision to prove her innocence. A vision that revealed exactly what went down in the Duke's greenhouse while she was busy getting the tea party ready. Her father flipped out, accusing her of using the god's name recklessly, but he quickly went quiet to think it over. Whispers broke out among the crowd, wondering if what she was saying was actually true, or if the whole thing was just a massive lie. Aristina kept going with her story, claiming that at first she didn't believe the vision and thought she was hallucinating, even scolding herself for being foolish. But then she added that when she doubted, the gods asked her if she'd only believe after seeing proof. Then, they placed that thing in her hand and ordered her to ask its owner about it. She then pointed directly at Lady Serene, calling her out on the fact that the ring she always wears was missing. Serene got flustered and claimed she'd put it in storage, wondering why she was asking all of a sudden. At that moment, Aristina opened the bundle and pulled out the exact ring Serene claimed was in storage, sarcastically asking how the gods could pick up a ring that was supposedly locked away. Serene was left in total shock. The crowd noticed blood on the ring and started buzzing, wondering if that really was the ring Serene always wore. Aristina felt satisfied with their reaction and dropped the bomb. The gods showed her Lady Serene talking to someone in the greenhouse. She revealed that the words the lady said in that vision were, "This is a little secret between us," which sent Serene into a deeper state of shock. Rolian turned to Lady Hyperion and asked her seriously if what Lady Aristina saw was the truth. Aristina was thrilled, realizing Rolian was finally starting to believe her. Rolian pointed out to Serene that, as far as he knew, there was no record of her going to the Duke's greenhouse, and nothing was mentioned about anyone bleeding. Then he asked her straight up if she had hidden this fact on purpose, making Serene stutter and lose her cool. With a sharp look, Rolian ordered her to spill the truth. Aristina jumped on the chance to turn up the pressure, mockingly asking why Serene was speechless and if she was actually lying. But Aristina felt something was off about Serene's silence, wondering why she wasn't even trying to make up excuses. Realizing the situation could flip on her, Rolian decided it was his duty to verify the divine revelation. In the name of the gods, he ordered Lady Hyperion to tell them everything that happened that day. Serene wondered in despair if things were really going to end this easily. But suddenly, a man's voice interrupted the scene, asking them to wait a moment. It was Lady Serene's private doctor, who announced he would explain everything and asked for a break. The doctor started his testimony, explaining that on the day of the incident, they arrived at the Duke's estate earlier than scheduled. Since he didn't have an invitation, he couldn't enter before the party started, forcing the young lady to go in alone. The doctor asked his lady to show them that thing to clear up the misunderstanding. Serene revealed her arm, showing a wound she explained came from a run-in with a pruning sickle. Aristina was confused, wondering what the wound had to do with the ring. The doctor insisted everything was connected and that the cause of all this was a servant from the Rosine ducal house. Rolian asked for details, questioning if he meant the Duke's staff were to blame. The doctor continued, revealing that the young lady was checking out the greenhouse because a protocol made from the Rosine family suggested it. There, due to a rookie gardener's mistake, the lady got injured. Aristina's father exploded in rage, disgusted that anyone would dare harm a guest in his home, and asked if the lady attended the tea party without getting treated. Serene explained that the young guy, the gardener, gave her first aid immediately and that she heard he had some medicine. This explained why the blood-stained ring was in the greenhouse. It must have fallen off while she was rushing to stop the bleeding. The doctor added that after the poisoning happened, the ring went missing, so he had to lie to his lady and tell her he kept it in a storage box so she could focus on recovering. Rolian asked why they hid this story. Serene replied with tears in her eyes that she couldn't tell anyone because that young man would have faced a horrific punishment. It was well known that in the Duke's house, even tiny mistakes were met with brutal punishments like whipping. Someone in the crowd gasped, asking if they cut people's wrists off, but the Duke screamed a denial, insisting they only get fired. But Serene kept up her drama, claiming she heard a maid named Mary had her wrist cut off, making Aristina wonder what on earth she was talking about. The Duke jumped up, yelling that it was a straight-up lie, insisting he'd never do that, and that there wasn't even a maid by that name. Rolian concluded that Serene lied to keep her secret safe, looking at the Duke and Aristina and thinking the Duke's house was a mess in itself, and that Aristina wasn't the only problem. Then Rolian asked Serene how the guy gave her first aid. She said he poured disinfectant on the wound and wrapped it in a bandage. He then asked what happened to the bandage. She told him he burned the old bandage when replacing it with a new one. And that's when Aristina suddenly realized where he was going with this. She realized poisoning isn't just about food. Using a slow-acting poison can make it hard to track the cause. She thought of a specific substance that becomes a powerful toxin when it hits blood, like curare. The Duke asked in surprise how she knew about these things, and she cheerfully replied that she loves studying toxicology. Then she corrected herself, saying she just likes reading books about poisons, while the others looked at her weirdly. Rolian stepped in, saying he'd heard of similar poisons under different names used by foreign tribes on arrowheads. He explained the poison is harmless normally but becomes toxic when mixed with blood, causing paralysis and respiratory failure. The doctor screamed that these symptoms perfectly matched what his lady suffered. Terror took over the doctor and Serene as they realized they'd been played by a con artist. Aristina shouted in victory, declaring she was right. She ordered her father to bring the rookie gardener immediately, but she quickly stopped, realizing the real culprit is usually someone else. She concluded that the protocol maid who told Serene to go to the greenhouse was very suspicious too. Serene was asked if she remembered the maid's face, but she said everyone wore the same uniform, and all she remembered was the disinfectant bottle. An idea sparked in Aristina's mind, and she asked Serene to draw the shape of that bottle. Serene was asked to draw the bottle, and the Duke wondered what the point was. Aristina confidently announced she'd use the drawing to find the real culprit in a clean, legal way. Despite the progress, Rolian insisted she wear the Holy Order's restraint device, an invisible shackle that can only be opened with holy power, making her feel like she was still being treated like a criminal. The next day at Duke Rosine's mansion, a young gardener was cursing his luck while working. He was complaining about being stuck with these low-level tasks and not getting the rest of his money, even though he did everything asked of him. While lost in thought, he suddenly bumped into someone and fell, shocked to find knights in the greenhouse. The knight apologized for pushing him. Panic set in as he wondered if they heard him talking to himself. At that moment, Lady Aristina appeared before him, giving him a massive shock. He thought she was locked up by the Holy Order waiting for death. She warned him that it's dangerous if he gets hurt. Aristina noticed the gardener was bleeding and said they needed to put medicine on his wound to prevent infection. Luckily, Aristina pulled out a medicine bottle. The gardener was terrified when he saw the bottle. It was the exact same one he used. He wondered how she got it when he was 100% sure he'd disposed of it. Aristina called him by his full name, Noah Meyer, and asked why he looked so surprised, confirming this was the medicine he used to treat Serene. Then she announced with a scary smile that it was time for a follow-up treatment. Noah realized he was busted and panicked. Thinking this Villainous might actually cut his wrist off, he fell to his knees begging for mercy, confessing he was just following orders. He revealed a lady named Brian ordered him to do everything, from injuring the girl in the greenhouse to pouring poison on her wound. Aristina thought her villainous reputation was really coming in handy, making people confess so easily, then called her father to hand over the confession. After that, all the servants were summoned, and the aides wondered what to do. The Duke confronted the maid, Brian, asking if what the guy said was true, but she flatly denied it, claiming she knew nothing. At that moment, Noah turned to her, screaming that she was a liar and reminding her they met behind the warehouse that morning, asking if she planned to get away with this alone. He pulled out the cash she gave him, plus a debt bond revealing her promise to give him more money after the princess was executed. The Duke announced there was nothing more to hear and ordered her taken away. Brian collapsed, confessing her mistake and begging the Duke. She fell at his feet begging for mercy, repeating that she only followed orders. The Duke calmly told her she might avoid execution if she revealed the mastermind behind the plot. Just as Brian was about to say the name, Aristina realized the real culprit would finally be revealed and wondered eagerly who tried to kill her. Brian said a name Aristina had never heard before, leaving her confused and stunned. Back in the courtroom, Rolian announced the trial was resuming. He stated that based on the revelation, a further investigation was conducted, proving the charges against Lady Aristina were false. He went on to announce that the real culprit, who bribed Duke Rosine's servants and plotted to poison Lady Hyperion, was Charlotte Remmel. Charlotte screamed that it was a ridiculous accusation, but an official cut her off, confirming that with all this evidence and 3 witnesses, she needed to stop denying it. He revealed the maid who helped plan the crime actually worked for the Remmel family originally. Rolian thought about how the young lady from the prestigious Remmel family didn't just conspire with a maid from another house, but also bought the poison from a shady place called the Blue Mill, leaving Charlotte shocked and wondering how they knew. Aristina was amazed they gathered all this proof in just one night. She realized her decision to involve Rolian was spot on. She didn't expect him to corner the culprit so brilliantly. He ordered the guards to take Charlotte to the security office, but she struggled, screaming at them to let her go. Aristina stopped them for a second. She'd spent the previous night thinking about it after the maid confessed, but she didn't remember the name Charlotte Remmel. She thought this lady might be connected to whoever killed the original Aristina and needed to find the real motive behind this grudge. Aristina confronted Charlotte directly, asking what she'd ever done to her to deserve this. Charlotte replied with a mocking laugh, saying of course she wouldn't remember, then reminded her of an incident 3 years ago at the Imperial Princess's birthday party. She accused her of pushing her aside and knocking her down in a rush to get in first. And instead of apologizing, she didn't even notice she fell. She screamed in a rage, asking how a villainess like her dared to look down on her. Aristina was speechless, wondering what this woman was even talking about. She bribed a kid to poison Serene and framed her, all just because she fell down. Even though original Aristina wasn't a saint, this motive seemed way too petty for a crime this big. What was weirder was that everyone looked at it like it was totally normal. Aristina felt a deep hatred for this place, and realized if she wanted to survive here, she had to get stronger. She slapped her hard and decided that if she wanted to stay alive, she had no choice but to be powerful. She told her she might understand if this was revenge against her. But what was Serene's fault in all this? Serene's life was in danger. If treatment had been delayed a bit, she'd be dead. She screamed at her, asking how she could try to kill a totally innocent person over something so trivial. Aristina exploded in anger, calling her trash that doesn't deserve salvation. But Rolian revealed there was another reason. The investigation showed many Remmel family employees were fired along with that maid. The reason was a severe financial crisis threatening the family, and their only hope was for their daughter to become a strong candidate for crown princess. But the news came that the position was promised to Lady Hyperion. So, the Remmel family planned to get rid of both of them in one move. Rolian told Charlotte she'd receive a fitting punishment for disregarding others' lives, and she broke down begging for her life. She screamed that she didn't want to die and would do anything before the doors slammed shut behind her. The crowd wondered if Aristina was truly innocent, and Rolian announced he'd now moved to the remaining sentencing. He explained that even if her goal was to clear up the poisoning, removing a holy relic without permission is a serious crime and she wouldn't avoid a harsh penalty. Aristina's father tried to step in, asking for the right to defend her, but Aristina stopped him, declaring that if she committed a crime, she should be punished accordingly. Her father was shocked by her reply, but she added with a smile that she didn't commit blasphemy, and pulled out a document. The document was an appointment letter from the Academy of Rare Plants stating that Lady Aristina Bianca Rosine was appointed Honorary Dean of the Academy, which researches the amaranthia flower and 33 other endangered species, signed by the director of the Imperial Academy. Aristina had remembered what the maid said about the botanist who used to pick the flowers, so she looked into it and discovered flowers could be collected from the Holy Order for research purposes. She explained to Rolian that according to regulations, plant collection for research is an exception. He coldly asked since when she was the dean of the academy. She replied she'd made a small contribution to the progress of imperial botany using the Star of Aurora necklace, so they gave her the honorary dean title immediately. She added she only collected one stem for their scientists, asking if there was a problem with that. Rolian was stunned by her ability to plan all this in advance. Helplessly, he announced they recognized Lady Aristina Rosine's innocence. Aristina thanked him, then asked him to free her from the restraint too. Rolian reluctantly agreed and asked her to go to the church with him. While they were there to remove the shackle, Aristina wondered if it had to be done this way. Rolian told her the restraints were strong and holy power had to be applied directly. While he was performing the ritual, Aristina looked at him, thinking he really did look like a messenger of God. Suddenly, she spotted a scar on his chest and wondered if this was the stigmata a representative of God possesses. But she remembered stigmatas are supposed to be a secret others can't see, and wondered why she could see it. She was sure it wasn't there before. Then she realized the location and shape of the scar looked familiar. It was a perfect match for the scar on that mercenary's chest. She wondered if that mercenary was also a representative of God. She tried to convince herself it was impossible, but the truth was clear and shocking. That mercenary is Rolian himself. Rolian realized his disguise was useless from the start because she recognized him with her holy power. Aristina felt super embarrassed, wondering why she had to meet Rolian of all people in that awkward situation and looking like that. But she also thought that if he had to go undercover to do something secretly, it meant it wasn't something he was proud of. Terror took over her at the thought that if he found out she knew his secret, he might have to get rid of her. This was info she never wanted to know, and she wondered why something she'd never seen before suddenly appeared, as if he showed it to her on purpose. She thought, did he really do it on purpose? Maybe because he knew the original Aristina would have definitely made a scene about it. From his piercing gaze, she realized her guess was right, and that she had to pretend she knew nothing and saw nothing. She secretly wished he'd let her leave quickly, and after he removed the restraint, she was thrilled it was finally over and there was no reason to see each other again. She turned to leave, but he suddenly stopped her, making her panic. She asked with a nervous smile if he had anything else to say. Rolian leaned in, noting it wasn't the first time she'd seen holy power, but she looked surprised earlier, wondering if she'd seen something else. Aristina went silent, wondering in terror if he noticed or was just testing the waters. Aristina squeezed her eyes shut, trying to dodge the situation, repeating to herself that she had no idea what he meant. Then she pointed at the jewel decorating his chest. Aristina decided to lean into her image as a rude and uncaring girl to get out of this mess. She pretended to be super shocked, pointing out that the jewel was a fake and that it was totally obvious from up close. She continued with fake boldness, expressing her surprise that His Holiness would use fake jewelry, sarcastically asking if his finances were that bad. She reassured him she wouldn't tell anyone his secret. Rolian smirked at her obvious attempt, then mockingly asked if she really thought he'd fall for such a lame lie. At that awkward moment, the door suddenly swung open and Duke Rosine, Aristina's father, walked in, apologizing for interrupting and explaining the priest told him he was allowed in. Aristina immediately jumped on the chance, smiling at her father with exaggerated excitement, telling him his timing was perfect and they'd just finished talking. Then Aristina bowed slightly, asking to leave. Rolian gave her a calm smile, saying he enjoyed their talk. He added with a meaningful look that since she has a good eye, he has many things he wants to ask her, hoping they'll meet again soon, which made her freeze from the stress. Aristina left the building with her father, lost in thought, sure that Rolian still suspected her, and wondering what kind of secret business he was doing that made him so clingy about it. Fear started creeping into her heart, imagining Rolian in his mercenary disguise holding a dagger. She wondered in terror if this hidden side of a clergyman meant he could be a hitman, and maybe he was the one who came to kill her that night. She turned to her father with a terrified face and asked seriously if a messenger of God was allowed to kill people. The Duke was shocked by her question and looked at her annoyed, wondering if her next goal was to commit blasphemy. Her father strictly warned her against talking such nonsense, explaining the death penalty isn't applied to those with holy power, begging her not to go around spreading such rumors, which made her realize Rolian might not be the actual killer. But then she thought that if he was roaming undercover on the day of the incident, it meant his alibi for the time of her attack was unclear, and she decided to keep the possibility of his involvement open given his massive holy power. Aristina remembered how people wanted her executed because she ruined the precious flower, and how she was chased by angry religious cults demanding she receive the Great Spirit's blessing from the elf religion. So she concluded, it's best to avoid all those fanatics. Meanwhile, she noticed Lady Serene standing outside under an umbrella with some servants and was surprised to see her there. Aristina stopped her father for a second. The Duke smirked, thinking she desperately wanted to ride in the same carriage as him, and told her that even though he didn't want to, he'd agree just this once for her. Aristina was shocked and flatly denied it. Aristina waved her hand, totally denying his words, telling him with a wide smile to go ahead, confirming she had zero desire to ride with him and not to worry about it. The Duke was annoyed by her reply and left for the main building, demanding she not cause any trouble, while Aristina looked at him confused, wondering why his mood flipped again. Aristina approached Serene and asked if she was waiting for her. Serene confirmed, saying she had something to ask. Aristina asked what it was, and Serene pulled out a sealed letter, hesitantly asking if the reconciliation invitation she gave her at the tea party that day was actually from a sincere place. Aristina answered with calm confidence that she'd already told her her intentions were sincere, even though she knew Serene might not want to believe it. Serene looked down slightly and said she understood. Suddenly, Serene's face lit up with a huge smile and tears in her eyes, expressing her massive relief to hear that, which took Aristina by surprise. Serene gave the letter to Aristina, saying it was late, but she wanted to give her something in return for the tea party. Aristina opened the letter to find an entry ticket to Serene's private tea salon called Serenity Salon. She thanked her warmly and promised to visit. Aristina said goodbye to Lady Serene with a kind smile, thinking that clearing up a misunderstanding with the story's heroine brings good results too. Serene waved with a bright smile, noting that ticket couldn't be bought even for a fortune, and that she'd be eagerly waiting for her visit. Later, at the Rosine Ducal main building, Aristina sat in her office listening to a report from a head butler who asked if she'd summoned him. She confirmed, asking what happened to the criminals. The servant explained Charlotte Remmel didn't act alone. Her parents were involved too. Since their plot almost touched the imperial family, they wouldn't escape the death penalty. Aristina asked about the other accomplices. He told her the gardener was killed while trying to escape, while the protocol maid committed suicide using the same poison used in the crime. Aristina concluded it wasn't a happy ending for everyone, but she felt relieved she was done with any future trouble from them. Then she asked the servant to bring her the incident record, and he obeyed immediately. Aristina started flipping through the papers, concluding it didn't look like anyone else was involved except the Remmels, but she stayed lost in thought, wondering who the other person was who snuck in that night to kill her. Aristina realized that unlike the main building, the annex has no protective magic. Since the killer targeted her exactly when she was detained, it had to be someone who knew that info perfectly. She thought as she wrote with her pen that going through the trouble of finding her to get to her, even facing the death penalty, meant they had an urgent reason to get rid of her fast. Or they held a deep grudge. She was certain that in either case, they'd definitely come back for her life again, so she had to organize a suspect list before that happened. Meanwhile, in the Duke's office, her father was thinking the crisis was safely resolved somehow. He'd planned to hand everything over to the Branch family and atone for her sins if she'd been found guilty. The Duke thought about it, admitting to himself he was sure his daughter was the culprit, wondering if this meant she wasn't as hopeless as he thought. Still, as he stood behind his desk, he concluded she still lacked the ability to lead the family. He resolved to make a firm decision on a successor ASAP, thinking of a young boy from the side branch. Despite being a child born after his father's death, he saw him as a strong candidate for being very useful. Elsewhere in the palace, the Duke was walking through the wide hallways before realizing he'd reached Aristina's room without noticing. When he peeked through the slightly open door, he was shocked by a bright light coming from inside, wondering in daze where it came from. It was a stunning shock when he saw Aristina sound asleep on the sofa, surrounded by glowing ethereal figures. He realized with a start they were the spirits of their great ancestors. The Duke watched the scene in shock as the spirits looked at her with pride and affection. He wondered in confusion why these spirits, who usually only appear to the legitimate heir, were showing up for Aristina specifically. The Duke rubbed his eyes, thinking exhaustion was making him imagine things. When he looked again, the spirits were gone. He concluded he was definitely wrong, while Aristina shifted in her sleep, whispering that she was cold. The Duke noticed a blanket next to her. Out of pity, he called her a fool and reached out to cover her, but he quickly stopped his hand, asking himself in disgust what he was about to do. The Duke backed off in terror as if struck by lightning, shocked at the idea that he was about to cover Aristina, the lady with the terrible reputation, as if she were a maid, a beggar, or even a hunting dog. At that awkward moment, the Duke's aide suddenly appeared at the door, wondering why he was there so late and if he came to see the lady. The Duke, stuttered, and flatly denied it, claiming he was just about to leave. Aristina stayed in a deep, peaceful sleep, while the Duke thought she should sleep as much as she can now, because soon she'll make a huge scene about going to the Imperial Palace as soon as a letter with the royal seal arrives. The morning sun rose and Aristina opened her eyes, touching her forehead with slight annoyance, wondering when she fell asleep. She remembered having terrifying nightmares where servants surrounded her with threatening looks, telling her she wouldn't leave this world so easily because their revenge wasn't finished. She imagined in her dream that the maids were plotting to strangle her with ribbons and ropes while smiling, so she grumbled in sadness about having to worry about death even in her dreams. Aristina sighed deeply, wondering what drove the original Aristina to make so many enemies. Suddenly, the maids burst into the room in a panic, apologizing profusely. Thinking they woke her up, the maids started crying and begging for forgiveness, promising not to talk again. Aristina realized the situation couldn't continue, and that her first step had to be improving her relationship with the staff. She raised her hand calmly, asking them to quiet down and listen. With a kind expression, she told them she'd seriously reflected after the recent incident and sincerely promised she'd never bully them again, offering her apology for everything in the past. But the maids misunderstood her sudden kindness, throwing themselves on the floor and wailing, claiming they were too stupid to understand her deep intentions. They wondered in terror if they'd made a bigger mistake, begging for mercy. Aristina stood there in total confusion, thinking despairingly that this wasn't what she meant at all, and her peace attempt backfired. This chaotic scene was interrupted by a head butler suddenly entering. He asked to come in, announcing the Duke wanted something from her. He told her the Duke requested her presence for tea with him. Aristina sat before him full of confusion, wondering secretly about his sudden invite, especially since she remembered the Duke hated spending time with his daughter. The Duke set down his teacup and explained that the Crown Prince had sent a personal letter, expressing his wish to ease the tension between the Imperial family and the Duke's family after the recent incident. Then he pushed the sealed letter across the table toward her. Aristina stared at the letter with intense interest, realizing that what she'd been waiting for had finally arrived. She recalled what she'd done last night, sorting through the suspect list and picking only those with the skill and cunning to pull off a perfect crime. Aristina recalled the top suspects capable of a perfect crime and concluded the main candidates were the brothers, the Crown Prince and the Second Prince. She remembered the legend saying the founding emperor married the mother of all dragons, and their descendants were born as human dragon hybrids. The dragon blood didn't fade over time. It appeared randomly among the imperial line. Crown Prince Aldensis inherited the power of the golden dragon, while the second prince, Zikrin, inherited the power of the red dragon. Because they had massive power, making them known as transcendentals, it was possible for them to commit crimes that seemed normally impossible. Aristina realized Aldensis had a clear motive too. Aristina thought the Crown Prince must have been under huge pressure because of the original Aristina's obsession with him. She remembered that in their last meeting, he treated her with an unusual, icy coldness. What added to her suspicion was that the attack on her happened shortly after that meeting, making her wonder if Aldensis was the one who actually killed Aristina. Back to the tea session with her father, Aristina decided to use the chance to end her alleged relationship with the Crown Prince. She asked her father not to worry and to take her with him. Her father interrupted, asking in shock if she'd finally given up her feelings for him. Aristina was surprised by how fast he guessed and asked how he knew, then claimed with an innocent face that her heart had grown cold toward him. The Duke was shocked by her words, noting she was using the same trick she used 3 months ago. He expressed his disappointment, saying he thought she'd matured after the recent incident, but she was back to her games, adding he'd been fooled by her more than once. He slammed his fist on the table, strictly warning her that if she caused any trouble for the Crown Prince again with her useless words, she'd be locked back in the annex. Aristina realized then that her credibility was at rock bottom and decided to herself that since they won't believe her words, she'd have to prove it with her actions. Later, Duke Rosine arrived with Lady Aristina at the majestic imperial palace. They were greeted by the Crown Prince, Aldensis Falcade, who told them with a calm smile he'd been waiting for them. They exchanged formal greetings, with Aristina and her father bowing to the Crown Prince. Aristina felt nervous because his presence was unnecessarily dazzling. Then Aldensis invited them to sit and talk. They sat together in the elegant reception hall. Aldensis started the talk, noting the imperial family almost made a huge mistake this time, and expressing relief the matter was settled safely. He continued in a sorry tone, confirming that if the truth had come out later, the consequences would have been terrifying. He admitted he didn't know how to apologize properly. Aristina watched his sad expression closely, wondering secretly if these feelings were real and sincere. She remembered Aldensis as someone who lacked skill in expressing human emotions. She concluded that if he was acting now, it would be very hard to notice even if he was the real killer. The Duke changed the subject, asking about the second prince and if something bad happened to him, which caught Aristina's attention. Aldensis explained the Duke hadn't heard because the lady was detained that day, noting the second prince was injured at dawn. It's believed he might have participated in a duel, making Aristina realize with a start that this timing matches perfectly with the dawn of the day she was detained. Aristina asked with interest if his injury was serious. Aldensis smiled and reassured her he recovered immediately, thanks to Rolian's intervention. The Duke noted there should be no reason for the prince to miss the imperial ball then, but Aldensis told him he heard the prince wouldn't attend this time because he was busy with other things, expressing hope the Duke would attend the ball just once in honor of the occasion. Aldensis smiled calmly, adding there were some matters still needing settlement and asked the Duke not to worry about it. The Duke smiled calmly, reassuring Crown Prince Aldensis that the young lady had reflected on her behavior and wouldn't cause trouble even in his absence. The prince replied they were ready for any emergency. At that moment, Aristina wondered secretly and with disgust if her causing trouble was just a given in their eyes. She coughed slightly to get attention, announcing she wouldn't attend the ball and asking them not to worry about her. Both Aldensis and the Duke were surprised by her announcement, wondering in confusion what she meant. Aristina explained simply she had other commitments that day. She continued confidently, revealing her plan to attend the General Assembly of the Imperial Merchant Guild instead of the ball. The two men were even more shocked, staring at her in daze, wondering what would drive her to such a weird decision. Aristina justified it by saying she read in an economic magazine that this assembly was a great chance to build a network with top investors and get funding, confirming that as a businesswoman she couldn't miss it. The Crown Prince gave her a look of doubt and surprise, mockingly asking if noble ladies read economic magazines. Aristina replied her financial report was in a sorry state, making the Duke wonder if she actually checked her reports. She replied with arrogant confidence that she's a noble after all and should do that. The Duke and the Prince were so stunned that Aristina thought secretly their shock was overkill, like they were seeing a monkey solve calculus. She told them that after all the false accusations she went through, survival in this world requires two main things: power and money, and she totally lacks both. She concluded that in her current miserable state, there was no room for attending balls and wasting time. So she put a bright smile on her face and politely asked the Crown Prince to forgive her absence. Aldensis gave her a side look and tilted his head slightly, making Aristina feel he doubted her motives and wondered if he could trust her. Because she expected this, she told him confidently she'd prepared something to prove her good intentions and started searching her dress. Aristina pulled out a paper and slammed it on the table, asking the prince to take a look, questioning if he could guess what it was. Aldensis studied the paper and said it looked like an abstract painting of something plunging down fast without hesitation. Aristina pointed at the prince excitedly, confirming his observation about this sharp drop. She revealed with weird pride that this drawing represents their merchant guild's financial performance, showing the catastrophic stock drop and the seizure of the rest of their assets. The Duke held his head, sighing at how ridiculous she was bragging about something so disastrous. Aristina went on about their businesses, which included luxury fabrics, high-quality tea and snacks, cosmetic ingredients from gems, and even rare bookstores. She described them as cash cows that provide stable profits and low risk, like cows giving milk their whole lives. Then she straight up blamed her father, accusing him of taking these profitable businesses but neglecting and totally ruining them. She explained that given this terrible financial state, her eyes lit up when she saw the assembly announcement, calling it a great coincidence. It was the same day as the ball. She explained her plan. Top businessmen would be busy with the ball, making the assembly relatively quiet, the perfect chance for her to move. She added that by skipping the ball, she'd prove to everyone she wasn't interested in the prince, and if she scored a good contract, she'd regain her status in her family, then asked them confidently if they felt her sincerity now. Aldensis and the Duke exchanged looks. The prince gave a hesitant nod, as did the Duke, making Aristina wonder why their reaction was so lukewarm despite all her explanations. Aldensis gave his usual charming smile and encouraged her to do her best, confirming he looked forward to the results. But Aristina, annoyed by how excessively handsome he was, covered her eyes, thinking secretly the first thing she'd buy with money was sunglasses to protect her eyes from that annoying glare. Aristina announced she was leaving to start the guild's restoration. Aldensis surprised her by offering to walk her out. Aristina turned him down fast, waving her hands and citing his busy schedule. She rushed out the door while the Duke bowed to the prince and announced his departure too. On the way back, Aristina watched the Duke, who looked annoyed, and thought about the prince, concluding his ability to pull that kind smile for someone he clearly hates makes him a very dangerous opponent. The Duke broke her thoughts when he remembered something, reaching out to give her back her small bag that he had. Aristina noticed it didn't have anything special, explaining why she totally forgot about it. Aristina pulled out the ring meant for financial accounts, which had been seized before her detention, and studied it. Her father told her coldly she should be fully aware of her bankruptcy, warning her against even dreaming of getting any financial support from the family. Aristina replied calmly, confirming she obviously expected nothing from him at all. The Duke paused and gave her a side look, thinking to himself if he was too hard on her, expecting her to beg for help, but he decided it was best not to talk to her. The Duke walked away with fast steps, expressing satisfaction she knew her real place, while Aristina felt his extreme coldness. Aristina shifted her thoughts to the upcoming Merchant Guild Assembly, convinced the Rosine family guild advisors would definitely attend. If she did well there, the news would reach her father, so she thought it best to practice by pumping some of her own money in first. Since her biometric data was registered in the ring, she only had to touch it to activate it. As soon as she did, a glowing magic circle appeared. Once the numbers started appearing, her eyes popped in shock. She started counting the zeros in days, tens, hundreds, thousands, only to discover the balance was a full billion. She screamed in shock and disbelief. Aristina looked at her shaking hand, wondering in confusion about the weird financial concept this family has. How could her father describe this massive amount as almost nothing? She realized she wasn't starting from zero as she thought, but standing on a solid gold floor. Aristina was filled with sudden confidence thanks to this massive fortune, and decided to head straight to apply for the assembly. But at the registration desk, the staff member shocked her by saying she wasn't eligible to enter and participate in the assembly. Aristina felt angry, so the staff apologized immediately. She remembered how the prince and her father agreed to her attending so easily, and she was furious thinking they knew it was impossible and left her to face the embarrassment alone. The staff explained entry wasn't available to all guild leaders to prevent peddlers from sneaking in. Aristina cut him off, confirming she wasn't a peddler. The staff agreed, but explained regulations limited entry to guilds ranked C and above. Aristina asked expectantly about her guild's current rank. After checking the records, the staff told her that her Black Rose Guild officially ranks 94th, and its rank is F. She wondered in shock and frustration how low the guild had plunged to get a failing grade. Aristina tried to soften the blow and look for any silver lining, noting there were at least 6 guilds below her. But the staff crushed her hopes, explaining the total registered guilds were only 95, meaning there was only 1 guild below hers. She asked nervously about the 95th guild. He told her its name was Coco. She found the name weird, thinking it sounds like a dog's name. The staff confirmed her guess perfectly. He explained Countess Mariana started that guild in her dog's name, and their investment method was simply throwing biscuits with company names and investing in the one the dog brings first. Aristina sat on a wooden bench outside, lost in shock and daze after realizing she wasn't just last among humans, but competing with mammals and pets too, certain it was impossible to enter the assembly with this miserable rank. Aristina imagined the crown prince and her father laughing at her helplessness, feeling furious because her perfect 2 birds with 1 stone plan was totally ruined. But she quickly jumped up with determination, refusing to give up and back off so easily, realizing her survival in life depended entirely on her success. She started thinking deeply, searching for a way out, until her eyes lit up with an idea, announcing she'd found the ultimate solution. On the day of the General Assembly, nobles and prominent figures flocked to the fancy hall. Aristina arrived in full elegance and confidence, drawing murmurs from the crowd who wondered why she was back, and making a scene after just being cleared of the previous charges. Some guests whispered doubts about her eligibility to enter, confirming to each other it was impossible for an F-rank guild to pass the assembly gates. Aristina walked with steady, confident steps toward the magic verification sphere and placed her hand on it. The device let out a sound announcing verification was complete and allowed her entry, leaving the doubters in total shock and confusion. A state of daze and massive buzz spread among the guests, not believing how she managed to raise her guild's rank 3 full grades in just 1 day, making the Black Rose Guild officially rank C, with Aristina Bianca Rosine proving herself as a true and qualified guild leader. Aristina's business plan totally floored one of the attendees, who couldn't believe a 94th ranked guild could pull off such an insane strategy, screaming that it had to be a total fake. When Aristina turned toward her with a cold stare while repeating the word fake, the lady panicked and started stuttering from pure terror. Despite her fear, the lady muttered that what she said was the truth, so Aristina calmly walked up and handed her a piece of paper, leaving her completely baffled. The paper was an announcement stating that the Black Rose Guild was open to buyout inquiries, which Aristina confirmed with total chill. She then explained that if her plan didn't work out this time, she'd just hand the guild over to a good owner. She added that she had no precious belongings left to offer, so she had no choice but to use the guild itself as collateral. Even though Black Rose was drowning in a massive financial deficit right now, she figured that once things went back to normal, it would become a prime asset she could flip as a subsidiary of the Rosine family. She was certain that financial experts would see its real value, even though she didn't actually plan on selling it. After all, her whole goal was just to grab everyone's attention, and she was looking forward to seeing them interested. Afterward, Aristina was led to a temporary seating area and noticed a decent amount of people were already there. Her seat was in a lonely corner, but she figured it was better than nothing at all. She decided to use this chance to introduce herself to other business moguls and build a network. But she was shocked to find that her designated area was completely empty and quiet, totally wrecking her initial plans. However, she noticed the person sitting next to her hadn't left, though she quickly realized he was fast asleep. She decided to kill time by getting some work done and started flipping through papers to see what kind of deals and drama were going down in the assembly. It caught her eye that everyone was talking about the mysterious phantom thief who had resurfaced, reportedly stealing the Golden Lily from the 11th ranked guild without touching a single cent or any other valuables. Aristina felt relieved that nothing like that happened to her guild, but she sarcastically wondered if it was because her guild wasn't famous enough to even be worth robbing. Meanwhile, a group of ladies approached her, and one of them mockingly asked why she wasn't at the royal ball, questioning if this was her finally admitting defeat to Lady Serene. Aristina instantly realized these ladies were trying to bait her into making a scene so they could get her kicked out of the assembly. But she stayed cool, and instead of getting dragged into a fight, she coldly held out her hand and demanded 1,000,000 barrels, announcing she had zero intention of playing their games for free. The lady was confused by the sudden demand, asking what she meant. Aristina pointed to a small sign she'd placed in front of her that clearly read, "No small talk, business consultations, 1,000,000 barrels per session." Then she warned them with a smirk that if their talk was just gossip, she'd call the manager for obstructing business. The lady stuttered and quickly claimed her talk was about business, then reluctantly pulled out the 1,000,000 barrels and handed them to Aristina, who thanked her coldly. The ladies left grumbling that the place was useless. Aristina smiled while counting the cash, happily thinking she hadn't even started working and already made 1,000,000 barrels, secretly thanking them for paying up before they could even start their insults. When Aristina went back to work, she was surprised to find the guy who was sleeping next to her had woken up and was holding her brochure. Reading it, she politely asked him to give it back since it belonged to her. But he ignored her and kept flipping the pages, so she repeated her demand more firmly, getting pissed at his rudeness and weird behavior. When the man pulled back his hood and spoke, his voice made her freeze. She realized instantly that she knew that voice all too well. The man's identity was revealed to be none other than the second prince, who mockingly called Aristina the literal definition of shameless. Shock spread through the crowd, with everyone wondering why the second prince was at the assembly instead of the imperial ball. Meanwhile, an elegant elderly lady named Lady Perovia appeared, looking a bit flustered and expressing regret that they couldn't stay hidden longer as they'd planned. Aristina jumped to her feet because she remembered seeing that name in the newspapers before. Lady Perovia was the elder of the imperial family who spent her whole life overseeing the palace's music box workshop. It turned out she was there because her business partner of 30 years had retired, and she'd come to the assembly to find a new partner. When one of the organizers asked why they were sitting in regular seats instead of their reserved ones, Lady Perovia replied she just wanted to watch the vibes quietly. Then the prince revealed his other motive for being there, announcing that besides helping his aunt, he was also there to find a partner for a top-secret imperial project. This announcement sent shockwaves through the attendees, who wondered why such a big deal was being brought up at a general assembly during the ball. Lady Perovia explained with a kind smile that she wanted to gather and talk only to those who preferred money over dancing, as a way to check how serious they were. Prince Siegfrieden turned to Aristina and told her he thought it was fine for him to stay in the C-rank guild area. The two exchanged sharp glares, each thinking the other was an annoying pest they didn't expect to. "See there." Then he confronted her directly, suggesting one of them should leave, insisting he couldn't go because of his important business. At that moment, Aristina realized she was facing the second prince, the one person she had the absolute worst relationship with. He approached her with a threatening tone, telling her to leave quietly before she caused any trouble. Aristina thought to herself that she came here to avoid the crown prince, only to run into a much bigger landmine. The prince repeated his demand for her to leave quietly instead of making a scene. Aristina tried to defend herself, insisting she wasn't planning any trouble, but he mocked her, asking who would even believe her. He reminded her of all the chaos she'd caused at previous parties, and how he was always the one who had to drag her out of those situations. He added that just seeing her right now was giving him psychological trauma, and Aristina had to admit to herself he wasn't wrong. The prince called the assembly organizer and reminded him of the rules, stating that if a problem arises before the meeting starts, it's settled by a vote from all participants. Then he suggested with a cunning smile that they put Aristina's departure to a vote, which made her furious, calling it ridiculous. Aristina faced the organizer firmly and asked if she'd broken a single rule today, and the man had to admit she'd followed the rules perfectly. Aristina turned to the prince, accusing him of abusing his power, but he insisted it was better to settle this now to avoid a scene later. Then he ordered the organizer to distribute the voting cards immediately, threatening a formal report if he didn't, which terrified the organizer. The trembling organizer realized he had no choice but to obey the prince's orders for now. The prince said goodbye with a victorious smile while she stood there, in shock. But before the distribution could start, an aide rushed to the organizer and whispered something that made him stop and ask in confusion if what he heard was true. Then the organizer turned to the prince with an apology, telling him the vote was now impossible. The prince was shocked and demanded to know why. The organizer explained that an investment had just been made into the princess's Black Rose Guild, and according to the rules, no guild with investors can be kicked out. The prince was fuming, asking sharply who the idiot was that would invest in her. But the organizer said he couldn't reveal the investor's identity because it was anonymous. Aristina wondered who the mystery investor was, guessing it might be her father, Duke Carnell, but she was relieved either way because she couldn't be kicked out now. She felt confident, telling herself there was no more problem and reminding herself she skipped the Imperial ball just for this assembly. She gave the prince a sharp look, hoping no one would bother her anymore since she needed to focus on making bank. On the other hand, Lady Perovia was looking at her with admiration, seeing her as a smart young lady. Lady Perovia thought the prince was acting very immature by showing his anger so openly, an opinion Aristina totally agreed with. Suddenly, Aristina flipped her attitude completely and approached the prince and Lady Perovia with a wide smile, praising the music box presentation as stunning, traditional, and masterfully crafted. Lady Perovia explained that their music boxes were known for their pure and precise sound compared to others, and even though they weren't high profit, they had a loyal cult following. Aristina showed a deep interest in this kind of business. The assembly organizer stepped in and politely asked if he could lead everyone to the main meeting hall, and Lady Perovia told him to go ahead. The organizer announced the general meeting would resume soon and pointed out a drink station for the guests to enjoy before we start. The prince suggested he and Aristina talk for a bit, but she immediately rejected his invite with a fake smile, claiming she wasn't thirsty. The prince told her with annoyance that he wasn't inviting her for a drink. He just wanted her to reveal her true motives quickly. Here, Aristina decided to turn the tables on him. She pretended to be shocked and shouted loudly that His Highness was hinting at his top-secret project. The prince was caught off guard by her accusation and denied it, calling it nonsense, but it was too late. Curious business moguls swarmed him, asking about the secret project and how to get in on it, while Aristina smirked as she walked away, thinking he wouldn't escape this situation easily, and knowing that feeling all too well since she'd been through it. Aristina found a quiet spot and thought about the prince's short fuse, then remembered what was said about his injury. Suspicion started creeping in. She remembered hearing the second prince was injured at the dawn of the day she was detained, and wondered if it really was just a duel. Or was there another possibility, that he was injured during a struggle with the original Aristina that night? This suspicion was fueled by their long-standing grudge. She recalled their first meeting as kids, when the little prince called her by her name, after she answered his call. He approached her nervously, hiding a flower in his pocket. Then he offered her the flower and asked if she wanted to be a prince's wife, promising he'd treat her well. But she coldly rejected his offer, announcing she'd marry the crown prince instead. The little prince was completely devastated. The situation ended in a violent fight between them, exchanging insults and threats. She realized that ever since then, they'd been fighting every single time they met. She remembered a recent confrontation where he told her he wouldn't tolerate her anymore, and that, unlike his brother, he had zero sense of decency. And the original Aristina had boldly challenged him, asking if he was trying to kill her and telling him to go ahead and try. Back to the present, she collapsed for a second, thinking she deserved what was happening to her because of how reckless she was in provoking him. But she quickly pulled herself together and decided that even though there was no hard proof Zikrin was the killer, it was smart to avoid him for now, just as a precaution. Just as she was about to leave, a voice interrupted her, offering good info. and she snapped back without hesitation that she wasn't buying anything. Aristina stopped for a second because the voice she heard sounded familiar. When she turned around, she found herself face to face with Rolian, who told her with a calm smile he'd been looking for her, leaving her in total shock and wondering why he was there. She muttered that she didn't expect to run into him so soon and asked why he was searching for her. Rolian gave her a meaningful look, asking why a man would search for a woman. Then he answered himself with a charming smile, announcing he was looking for her because he's interested in her. Obviously, Aristina realized instantly he was playing some game with her. She thought to herself that his charm might work on others, but it would never work on her. He clearly knew she'd busted his disguise before, so there was no point in playing dumb. She decided to confront him directly. It was time to use some bait. Just as she was about to pull her business plan out of her bag to show him, a small bundle fell out. Rolian politely picked it up and handed it back. She thanked him, and he asked if the piece was precious. She replied it was just a piece of metal she found on the street, but since it looked expensive, she decided to get it appraised later. She was watching his reaction to see if the piece meant anything to him, but Rolian didn't show any emotion, making her wonder if he was a great actor or just telling the truth. At that moment, the resumption of the general meeting was announced and everyone was told to gather in the main hall, so Aristina decided to excuse herself. On her way, she was surprised to find Rolian following her, so she asked why. He replied he just wanted to talk to her longer. She snapped back that she had nothing to say to him, but he insisted he had plenty to say and suggested they drop the formalities. Aristina realized he wouldn't leave her alone until she listened, so she reluctantly agreed. He told her she could leave whenever she wanted. Then she asked what he wanted to say, and he told her he noticed she was short on funding. He held out a paper, encouraging her to shop to her heart's content. Aristina was floored and asked in shock if he was the one who invested in her business group. When she questioned the legality of a representative of God meddling in worldly business, he replied it was fine as long as he used a different identity. She mocked him, saying he had zero investment sense since her guild was on the verge of bankruptcy, but he told her that's exactly why he was giving her high-level info. She replied that just thinking about it was enough. Then he asked if she knew why the second prince was injured. He told her with a cunning smile that it was linked to his secret project, and that he'd tell her everything if she promised him one thing. She asked what the promise was, and he shocked her by asking her out on a date. Aristina lost interest instantly and announced she wasn't curious anymore, but his next words made her freeze in her tracks. He revealed there was a problem with the supply of the stabilizer used to control the Imperial Brothers' curse. Aristina wondered what curse he was talking about. Did he mean the balance curse? This world was inhabited by beings of massive power, and to keep the world's balance, the world imposes heavy restrictions, known as the Pillars, whenever a transcendental being walks the earth, and the Dragon Blood Princes were no exception. Aristina remembered hearing they suffered from spiritual instability and wondered if Zikrin's injury was actually caused by a stabilizer issue. Rolian confirmed her suspicions and offered to help her secure the contract for the stabilizer. He asked if this was a fair trade for a date, suggesting they start with a friendly chat if a date was too much. And Aristina thought the offer wasn't bad, but she corrected herself, saying that unfortunately she had zero interest in secret projects. Then she turned sharply and headed to the meeting hall. Ignoring Rolian's call, the organizer announced that all guild leaders must stand by the project they want to bid on. Aristina stood confidently in front of Lady Perovia's table, announcing she wanted to bid on this project. Rolian was stunned by her sudden move. While Aristina sarcastically thought she didn't know much about business management, she was going to use their expertise to make music boxes her new source of income. Lady Perovia smiled, praising her smarts and awareness of the risks of non-public bidding, confirming that unless you're trying to suck up to the Crown Prince, this is where the real money is. Two major guild leaders joined her, agreeing that a true merchant knows a golden opportunity when they see one. Aristina noticed the competition was tougher than expected, but felt satisfied being among people who spoke her language. Lady Perovia suggested they find a more private spot to discuss details, which everyone agreed to, while Rolian watched silently. Rolian looked at Prince Zikrin, thinking he couldn't understand Aristina at all. After a while, Lady Perovia told the competitors the contractor would be chosen after tomorrow's interviews and that the location details were in the brochures she'd distributed. As Aristina was leaving, one of her rivals stopped her, expressing surprise at her interest in music boxes, since she thought she only cared about the Crown Prince. Aristina replied she'd decided to come to her senses, so the lady mockingly asked if she was even capable of running a business. Then she pointed at her guild's miserable state, comparing it to a broken wooden wagon. Aristina felt deeply insulted. It was worse than hearing the words out loud. Aristina admitted her guild was indeed stuck like that wagon, which surprised the lady, but Aristina added that when a wagon like that gets pushed, It has no choice but to roll. Then she kicked the wagon hard, shattering it and scattering its contents. She showed everyone that when a wagon rolls, it has no choice but to move forward. The next day, Aristina arrived at her Black Rose Guild headquarters holding a notice. The notice said Lady Perovia's workshop was looking for a trading guild to handle all its operations, and that she intended to sign a contract with a guild capable of securing the necessary materials. Applicants were required to bring a sample of the maple walnut wood used in music boxes to tomorrow's meeting, knowing that participating in the interview required both the contract and the sample. When Aristina entered the guild headquarters, the employees who were playing cards were shocked by her sudden presence. Panic took over, and they tried to hide the cards quickly. Aristina coldly asked if there was a problem with the owner visiting her own guild, and one of them stuttered a denial. But she wasn't fooled. She pulled back the cover to reveal everything. The employees tried to justify it as part of their work, but she ordered them to shut up. Aristina made a firm decision to fire every single employee in her guild, leaving them in total shock, protesting and worriedly asking how they'd survive after this sudden firing. One tried to win her over, calling her decision too harsh and asking her to chill, but she faced him strictly, noting they did nothing but play and embezzle her money, disgusted by their backtalk. With a sharp gaze and eyes glowing with rage, she threatened to give them a taste of their own medicine and force them to pay back 100 times what they stole, which terrified them. Faced with this scary threat, they had no choice but to bow quickly and thank her for everything before fleeing the place. Aristina mocked their escape, thinking they'd taken advantage of her being too soft, then prepared to leave before noticing a young guy still in his spot looking super nervous. She stopped him, asking who he was, and he stuttered out that his name was Benjamin Edwards. Aristina pointed to the performance report showing a sharp profit drop and asked if he prepared it. Benjamin shyly admitted it and apologized, but she surprised him with a calm smile and told him he'd keep working with her. Remembering she saw him working hard alone earlier, she decided to use this chance to his benefit. Then she generously announced she'd give him the combined salaries of all the fired employees, making Benjamin's eyes light up with hype and gratitude, declaring total loyalty and dedicating his life to serving the guild. Aristina thought to herself he was a very materialistic kid, but she quickly gave him his first mission: go to the nearby lumber yard and get the best sample of maple walnut wood. Benjamin took off hyped, promising to search the whole city. Before she could process him leaving, Benjamin rushed back panting, shocking her with his unexpectedly fast return. Benjamin delivered the bad news. Every nearby shop was out of maple walnut wood because someone had bought out the entire market supply. Aristina was shocked by the news, but also impressed by Benjamin's efficiency in checking all those places so fast. Benjamin suggested the big lumber shop on Brunt Street might have stock, but sadly added it was closed today because the owner was summoned to the Imperial Palace. Aristina felt annoyed and hesitant hearing the Imperial Palace mentioned, remembering she'd barely avoided the Crown Prince and Second Prince recently and didn't want to go there at all. She asked Benjamin if he had a pass to enter the main palace. He gave a nervous laugh, saying he's just a commoner, so she realized she had to go herself. Aristina decided to handle it and go check, while ordering Benjamin to keep searching elsewhere. Once she reached the palace, she asked a guard where the lumber merchant was, but the guard didn't know details. Aristina watched the majestic palace in silence while listening to the guard, who added there were many people looking for the lumber merchant today, making her worry someone beat her to it. She realized she had to hurry. She searched the palace hallways anxiously, wondering where he disappeared, until she spotted a man carrying a box and happily thought it was him. She called him the lumber merchant, but the man with the mustache carrying a pink box told her he was a jeweler, not a lumber merchant. Before recognizing and welcoming her warmly, Aristina asked if he'd seen the lumber merchant. The jeweler said no. He tried to use the chance to show his jewelry for furniture she might be ordering, but she coldly cut him off, saying she was in a rush and hurried away. Aristina continued her search, wondering if she should take another path. Suddenly, she froze when she saw Crown Prince Aldensis in the hallway talking to an official. Annoyed, he showed up when she desperately needed to find the merchant. Fear took over that the prince might misunderstand her presence and think she came to see him, so she decided to avoid him at any cost and desperately looked for a place to hide. She spotted a door and decided to sneak in for a moment until he passed, while the official outside praised Aldensis for covering for the second prince's neglect. The moment she entered the room and some people inside were about to leave, she was shocked when the door opened again and the crown prince himself walked in. She froze in terror and despair, wondering why he chose to enter this specific room. Meanwhile, while hiding, Aristina overheard a conversation between a servant and Crown Prince Aldensis. The servant asked what to do with the flowers Lady Serene sent, and the prince calmly ordered him to decorate his private hall and distribute the rest to the staff. The servants obeyed and left, leaving Aldensis alone in the room. Suddenly, Aldensis turned toward Aristina's hiding spot with a sharp gaze, coldly asking if she'd really sunk so low as to sneak into his room. With a strict tone, he ordered her to come out, making Aristina freeze in terror as she realized the mess she'd gotten into. She came out reluctantly, regretting her rush to hide, realizing her panic just created an unnecessary misunderstanding. Aldensis gave her a look of disappointment, noting, he thought for a second she might have changed, but found her the same as always. Aristina felt a massive pressure from his presence and decided that even though she didn't want to make excuses, she had to clear up this misunderstanding. She tried to explain she didn't come to see him, but he strictly cut her off, confirming he'd had enough and didn't want to hear the same lies again. Just as he angrily ordered her to get out of his sight, a familiar voice called his name. It was Rolian, who suddenly appeared with his usual calm and elegance. As soon as he entered, the suffocating pressure in the room vanished, making Aristina breathe a sigh of relief. Rolian and Aristina exchanged greetings, and Rolian noted her timing was perfect since someone was looking for her. To Aristina's total shock, the jeweler she'd met earlier appeared from behind Rolian, calling her name excitedly. The jeweler greeted the prince, respectfully, and Aldensis allowed them to skip formalities and continue their talk. The jeweler told Aristina the lumber merchant she was searching for had been jailed for bribery, which explains why she couldn't find him in the palace. Aldensis was surprised to hear she really was looking for a lumber merchant, so Aristina used the chance to confirm she was there on other business, asking if he believed her now. The prince realized his mistake and looked embarrassed while offering a formal apology for the misunderstanding. Aristina smiled kindly, confirming it didn't matter, and announced she was leaving since things were clear, secretly praising the jeweler's perfect timing. But her relief didn't last long, as Rolian suddenly approached, announcing he'd walk with her because he had something to say. Aristina felt nervous and started sweating, grumbling about the non-stop problems, trying to dodge by saying she was a bit busy. But a cunning idea sparked. She realized if she played it smart, she could get rid of both of them in one blow. She turned to Rolian with a confident smile and announced she accepted the offer he'd made her earlier, which left Rolian confused and flustered. When Aldensis asked in surprise about the offer, Aristina boldly said it was a request for a date. She told Aldensis that His Holiness expressed a desire to start a relationship with her. Aldensis looked shocked and disturbed, thinking a representative of God who vowed to love only one person wouldn't make such a request lightly, which made Aristina celebrate her plan's success. Aristina thought this trick would prove to Aldensis she had zero interest in him, but she was shocked by Rolian's unexpected reaction. Wondering why he said that, panic took over, thinking she had to force Rolian to back off the date topic, relying on the fact he couldn't easily admit to a formal relationship given his religious status. After a moment of silence, Rolian smiled calmly and seemed to accept the game, lightly admitting he was busted. He smoothly apologized for deceiving her, announcing he was leaving since his plan was exposed, leaving Aristina stunned at how fast he gave up, before Aldensis stopped him and asked him to wait. While Aldensis started talking about his mother wanting Rolian's opinion, Aristina started rummaging through her bag in total panic, dreading what would happen next. Aristina rummaged through her bag in extreme stress, only to discover the piece had vanished. Recalling the moment she bumped into Rolian and realizing he'd swiped it, she was certain then that his approach was a deliberate move to get that metal piece. She bit her thumb anxiously, thinking about how important it was and wondering what to do now. But the worry quickly faded into a cunning smirk. The piece in the bag was a total decoy and a trap. She felt relieved he wouldn't realize he'd been played until he got back and opened the bag, hoping he'd stop chasing her after this. She concluded that even if he had suspicions, he couldn't confront or accuse her openly because he'd have to admit he pickpocketed her bag in the first place. With that obstacle gone, Aristina got her cool back and turned to the jeweler with a bright smile, suggesting they resume their work, thanking him and promising to contact him soon. While leaving, she thought the lumber merchant being jailed on a night like this was worrying, but found comfort that she wasn't the only one who failed to get the wood. Once outside, she found Benjamin waving hyped in front of the carriage, announcing loudly he finally found a lumber merchant with the stock. Aristina's eyes lit up with joy, asking if it was true, but Benjamin looked flustered and said there was a problem. She told him to explain as they headed there. In the carriage, Benjamin explained the merchant flatly refuses to sell his wood to music box makers, justifying it by saying he won't let his carefully treated wood be used for luxury trinkets. Aristina suggested they buy the wood under the guise of using it for something else, but Benjamin warned her another guild leader tried to forge a contract before and ended up kicked out empty-handed by the angry merchant. Aristina realized how stubborn this merchant was, while Benjamin hesitantly wondered if they should look elsewhere instead of wasting time. Aristina confidently refused to back down, insisting they go and check for themselves first, determined to try anything before giving up. When they reached the shop, the gray-haired lumber merchant faced them with an angry look, screaming at them to get out immediately. The merchant loudly confirmed he had no wood to sell to music box makers like her. Aristina gave a nervous smile while Benjamin whispered in fear that this guy doesn't look like someone you can reason with. The merchant justified his rage by saying he was already fed up with what he called those elf cult jerks, warning them not to bother him, which surprised Aristina and Benjamin, who explained they're a fake religious cult that worships plants. Aristina remembered that cult well. The merchant explained they run around half-naked in leaves, preaching a return to nature and treating anyone who touches plants like a murderer. Aristina recalled seeing them protesting against her and demanding her execution during her trial. Aristina looked at the total mess in the shop and the torn elf cult posters, concluding this was the reason for the chaos. She realized the cult wouldn't leave a lumber merchant alone, meaning they were bitter enemies. A cunning idea sparked in Aristina's mind, and her eyes glinted with mischief before she called the old merchant. The merchant sat down frustrated, confirming again her attempts were useless, and he wouldn't sell her wood even if she offered 10 million. With a confident, calm smile, Aristina asked him if his mind would change if she offered 100 million. The merchant and Benjamin were both floored, their eyes widening at the number, repeating it in total disbelief. But the merchant quickly caught himself and closed his eyes stubbornly, declaring it was impossible and he wouldn't blink at the offer. Aristina faked disappointment and smirked, saying it couldn't be helped then. She picked up one of the torn elf cult flyers, noting she really wanted to spend her money here, but she'd direct this donation to support the elf cult instead. The merchant freaked out and jumped up, asking in terror if she really planned to donate 100 million to those maniacs. Aristina replied with fake innocence, confirming it. She explained with an innocent smile that since he refuses to sell, she decided to invest her money elsewhere. Then she raised her hand to show a magic interface asking for a donation to the elf church. The merchant stared at it in daze, noticing the previous total donations didn't exceed 17 barrels, proving they were short on donors. With a fast move, Aristina reached for the donation button, announcing she'd do it herself, while Benjamin screamed in the background, terrified of her move. A magic message appeared confirming 100 million barrels donation. The merchant's face turned red from shock and rage, unable to speak more than broken words. At that moment, Benjamin rushed and grabbed the merchant's shoulders, begging him with tears of despair to sign the contract immediately, asking how they could let those cursed people get all that money. While the merchant stood in total shock, Benjamin kept shaking the merchant, warning him that the elf church followers would get even more arrogant with this massive financial support, begging him to direct his lady's weird spending habits toward a sound business deal, while the old merchant tried to refuse weakly. Aristina enjoyed spending the money so much that, out of fun and recklessness, she raised her hand toward the magic interface, announcing she might raise the donation to 1 billion barrels, making Benjamin scream in panic to stop her. Under this pressure and the threat of losing the money to his enemies, the old merchant finally gave in and raised his hand in frustration. Aristina smiled victoriously and asked confidently if he'd sign the contract now. The next day, in front of the Silver Dove Palace, many applicants gathered. A staff member told the applicants, including a green-haired lady, that entry wasn't allowed without the required wood sample, making the lady annoyed. The lady grumbled to her companion about the impossible condition, wondering if anyone would pass, but she quickly smirked, convincing herself that if no one passed, they'd have to change their minds and let everyone in. Meanwhile, Aristina arrived, and the arrival of Lady Aristina Bianca Rosine was announced. Her presence surprised the guests. One wondered if she'd even read the invitation terms, while others hoped she wouldn't cause a scene as usual. Aristina headed to the reception desk, and the official asked for the contract specifying the sample and purchase price. With a confident smile, Aristina announced she brought the required items, while her maid opened a luxury box containing the contract and sample. The green-haired lady and her companion were in total shock, wondering in daze how she got the contract. The lady guessed she must have settled it with her massive money. Still, she tried to reassure herself, thinking that if Aristina raised the price too high to get the wood, the cost wouldn't match the profit, leading to her being disqualified anyway. But the official confirmed Aristina's papers were correct and let her in, making the lady fuming with rage and confusion. On the other hand, Aristina passed her with a mocking smile, thinking there was no law against spending money to get wood, and she just used her smarts a bit. Once inside, Aristina looked around, wondering if anyone from the Duke's family attended, since she desperately wanted to brag about her skills to them. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar person, Eunice, Duke Carnell's chief aide. Eunice hid behind a bush to watch her, While Aristina expressed surprise, the Duke sent his chief aide despite her thinking he wasn't interested in this project at all. Aristina realized the competition would be tough and vowed to perform this interview perfectly. At that moment, the staff told her she could enter now. Aristina was led to a waiting room and told to wait there for a bit. She sat thinking seriously that securing this contract would boost her status in the family, preparing mentally for potential questions. Suddenly, a violent shaking sound echoed, and the ground started trembling under her feet, making her wonder in terror if it was an earthquake. She tried to hold on to her bag during the shaking, complaining that at this rate they wouldn't even be able to do the interview, and mourning how hard it was to get that precious sample. Aristina heard Lady Perovia's voice calling out in fear, asking someone to stay in their place. She concluded the precious future client was in danger and tried to get up fast, but her attention was suddenly caught by her bag starting to glow with a bright, weird light. She pulled the wood sample out of the bag, only to find it emitting a stunning green light with magic energy like vines wrapping around it. From that energy, the wood started making calm, sweet musical notes. Aristina described it to herself as a lullaby. In a magical scene, the green energy opened to reveal a glowing green jewel that grew directly from the wood, making Aristina stare in total daze and awe. Along with this weird event, the earthquake stopped and everything went quiet. She heard a man's voice talking to who he called First Ant. Aristina raised her head to find the speaker asking the ant if she was hurt, only to be shocked when she realized this elegant man was none other than the old lumber merchant she'd dealt with yesterday. She wondered in confusion why he was here in the palace. Lady Perovia approached her with a reassuring smile, asking if the situation surprised her. She noted she didn't expect her to worry about her like that, then apologized and explained she almost felt guilty for trying to trick her. Aristina's confusion grew, so Lady Perovia explained with the merchant's agreement that this test wasn't actually about music boxes as rumored. It was a secret test to find a contractor capable of handling the World Tree Lullaby. Aristina stood there failing to understand, so the merchant asked seriously if she was aware of the curse the dragon blood owners carry, promising to explain all the mysterious details surrounding this test. The old lumber merchant explained the first emperor had prepared several countermeasures to stop that curse, revealing one was known as the World Tree Lullaby, which manifested in that glowing green jewel. Aristina stared in daze at the jewel in her hand, while the merchant confirmed what she held was exactly that, lullaby, adding that harvesting it only requires the power of spirits. The merchant went on to explain that spirits and dragons cannot deal or trade directly, so humans were used as middlemen. But he noted sadly that as soon as these middlemen realized the value of that power, they were consumed by greed, trying to use it to control the transcendentals and seize power. He confirmed in a dark tone the result always ended in a guaranteed disaster. However, he reassured her that luckily, after many trials and errors, they finally found people capable of handling this dangerous mission well. He approached with a serious and strict look, announcing those people are none other than greedy devils who chase money with total clarity and transparency. Then the merchant pointed his finger directly at Aristina, announcing loudly they were looking for people exactly like her, leaving her frozen from shock. Aristina stood wondering in confusion if that was a compliment or an insult. Lady Perovia stepped in with a calm smile, adding that Lady Aristina had even defeated the Great Spirit in a duel, making Aristina more confused, flatly denying it and confirming she'd never seen the Great Spirit before. At that moment, the old merchant pointed to himself with pride, announcing he is the Great Spirit. Aristina was in total shock, her tongue tied, after realizing this stubborn old merchant was the Great Spirit they were talking about. The old guy admitted he never expected her to sponsor the elf church, explaining he despises them because they spread their ideas using his name. Aristina felt super embarrassed and rushed to apologize, but the old man laughed cheerfully, confirming the most important thing is that she passed the test. The old man recalled how she rejected the chance to get close to the imperial family and top figures, and instead put herself in a tough spot to save her staff and secure the contract. Lady Perovia looked at her with admiration, confirming she was the talent they'd been looking for. The old man added that watching her reminded him of his youth, while Aristina thought to herself pragmatically that she only did it because she didn't want to lose her source of income. Their talk was suddenly interrupted when the doors opened and Crown Prince Aldensis entered with the second Prince Zikrin, asking if the final candidate had been chosen. The two princes stopped in their tracks seeing Aristina, shock written on their faces as they said her name in daze. Prince Zikrin exploded in anger, objecting strongly and considering it totally illogical to choose Aristina as the contractor for this secret project. Zikrin continued his attack, reminding them she'd been chasing his brother, the Crown Prince, every day since she was 7, accusing them of choosing someone who embodies shady motives. The old man gave him a sharp, strict look, asking in a threatening tone if the prince doubted his judgment. Zikrin backed off a bit, sweating, trying to justify he didn't mean that. He was just surprised. The old man turned to Aristina, explaining that what the prince said might have been true in the past, but not anymore, confirming confidently her current motive is money, which Aristina confirmed with a proud smile and a nod. Zikrin felt super frustrated, noting she'd claimed similar things before. The old man expressed his total confusion about who was obsessed with whom in this situation. In a moment of reflection, Aristina told them feelings don't last forever, concluding that after chasing the prince for over 10 years with nothing in return, it was totally natural to feel drained and hopeless. She confirmed the Great Spirit's words were 100% correct, while secretly marveling at his ability to express the situation so eloquently. Then Aristina bowed with extreme elegance, offering a sincere apology for her past rudeness and overstepping, promising this behavior would never repeat and asking them to end the misunderstanding. She added with a bright, confident smile that she sincerely wishes happiness for the Crown Prince and Lady Serene, while secretly hoping they wouldn't even think about killing her anymore. Aldensis stared in daze and was silent for a bit, before turning away muttering he understood, which left Zikrin in total shock and unexpected surprise. With an expression of regret and sorrow, Aldensis placed his hand on his chest and apologized to Aristina for failing to understand her feelings and doubting her so harshly, asking for her forgiveness. Aristina replied with total calm and without hesitation that she obviously forgives him. Zikrin was in a state of total daze and confusion, unable to believe Aristina's feelings for his brother had really vanished. While she gave him a calm look and called him a fool in her head, Aristina quickly moved past the moment, turning the talk toward the contract mentioned earlier, expressing with a confident smile how grateful and honored she was to be chosen. Then she addressed Lady Perovia and the Great Spirit, explaining sincerely her real goal from the start was the music box deal, praising Lady Perovia's products and confirming it's a stable and very profitable trade. But Lady Perovia grabbed Aristina's hands with an apology and a sorry look, explaining she decided to hand the music box business to her maid who cared for her all her life. Aristina smiled kindly and reassured her it was fine and she just wanted to prove her seriousness. Aristina used this rejection smartly to announce with a calm, faked smile that it seemed hard then for her to move forward with the stabilizer deal, wishing them luck in finding another contractor. Her sudden decision freaked out the Great Spirit, who held his head in panic, realizing she preferred her profit and safety over his decision, seeing her as a unique candidate that comes once in centuries. The old man and Lady Perovia rushed to stop her, standing behind and beside her, begging her to wait a bit and delay her final choice, noting the story isn't over and she hasn't even heard the contract terms. So, the old man announced he had matters to discuss privately with Aristina, asking the princes to leave. Aldensis and Zikrin left the room with heavy steps and confused expressions. Once they were alone, teacups were brought, and Aristina started talking, explaining she meant to ask after signing, but seriously questioned the true identity of the World Tree Lullaby, realizing it wasn't just a simple stabilizer. Lady Perovia smiled wisely and confirmed it was much more important than that, noting the topic is so secret even the princes themselves don't know its real purpose. Aristina realized then the power she'd possess, and wondered in surprise if by signing this contract she'd become the one with the upper hand in the deal. Lady Perovia confirmed it, explaining this element is something they literally cannot live without, making Aristina realize she'd have an invincible trump card against those two scary princes. Aristina thought deeply, concluding that signing this contract would be her protective shield, finally freeing her from constant worry about being killed by either of the rival brothers. The old man broke her thoughts with a light cough to get attention, then handed her a paper with the unit prices for the lullaby, confirming her profit margin far exceeded what she'd make from music boxes. Aristina looked at the paper and was totally floored, asking in a shaking voice if this insane figure was really for just one unit. The old man nodded, confirming this is exactly the stable and profitable trade she was looking for. Aristina closed the file, thinking this amount might not seem huge to a filthy rich family's only daughter. But for her, the situation was totally different. With an expression of determination and satisfaction, she announced her firm decision to close the deal and sign the contract immediately. The scene shifts to outside her palace, where Aristina was happy that getting a contract that guarantees massive profit and safety was like winning the jackpot. She kept walking and humming happily, thinking this huge achievement would finally earn her some respect and appreciation from her father, the Duke. But she suddenly stopped when she spotted her father standing alone, and questions started spinning in her head about why he was there. Aristina assumed the rumors of her success had already spread, so she headed toward him with confident, cheerful steps, telling him there was no need for this hyped and excited welcome. Her father turned toward her, asking harshly if she'd lost her mind. Aristina flinched from his harsh reaction, and her smile faded into shock and confusion, wondering in terror secretly if she'd messed up something again.